Oh. Hi everyone, welcome back to Arguing Semantics. Today we are talking about Peacemaker, the new series on HBO. Peacemaker follows the titular character post the Suicide Squad as he escapes from prison, only to be forced into another clandestine mission in order to save the world once again. The first thing I can say right away is that Peacemaker was absolutely great. There are so many things to love about this series. It's not going to be for everyone, but for those who it is for, yeah, you're going to absolutely love it. There are so many positives and just a few negatives, but overall, really enjoyed it. The first thing to talk about is obviously John Cena himself playing Peacemaker. He was definitely one of the standouts from the Suicide Squad movie, so it makes sense that this would be where James Gunn would want to go next with those characters. And telling a more ground level and grounded story in this very over-the-top situation was handled incredibly well. The biggest thing this series has going for it is the cast is amazing. First and foremost, John Cena carries this show better than I think anybody would have accepted it. He brings a lot of humanity to a character who is very over the top and silly in a way that I think is partially just good writing. They managed to make Peacemaker lovable in spite of himself, because he is somebody who is prone to violence. He is insensitive. He is over the top. He's a little bit much to hang out with in general, but they managed to make him charismatic and fun to be around, and you can see why people would like him as a person in spite of everything. The biggest thing that this show did, I saw someone mention early on, one of the things they liked about his character was that he says a lot of insensitive things, but it's never out of malice or hate. It's always out of just well-meaning ignorance. Like, he genuinely likes people, he likes being around people. He's just been raised in a way that he doesn't have all of the social graces that other people might. He kind of feels out of place in modern society, which, considering his father figure in his life, that is not surprising at all. The rest of the cast is great and all also hold their own. Everybody is given something to do. Everybody has an arc. Some are more involved than others. Specifically, the character of Vigilante is just this lovable, dopey, murderous sociopath. He steals so many of the scenes he's in and has one of the legitimately best moments in the series. Granted, it felt a little bit weird with how they were coding him as autistic and sociopathic, but overall it still felt like they handled that character well, and how he sees the world and is genuinely just a nice guy outside of being a violent sociopath. It was really great to see how they handled his character and his just inability to read any situation at all. Everybody else is given some interesting stuff to do. Myrn has a great arc. Harcourt, as she slowly opens up to the new members of the team and to Chris Peacemaker Smith himself. Economos has a nice little storyline where he's coming to terms with part of himself and also earning his place on the team. And Nyota Adebayo has far and away the best subplot next to Peacemaker himself. She owns that role, and really they do some interesting stuff with her character, especially with the twists as who her character is. But like I said, the biggest thing is John Cena himself actually managed to show a pretty wonderful range for his character. Like, he has some genuinely tear-jerking moments and some genuinely great emotions on display throughout the series, but in some particular moments. There was one moment he had that I was genuinely tearing up. I would not be surprised to see if he got a Sleeper Emmy nomination. He was very good on this show, and I'm happy to see where this might go moving forward. I don't think he will, because most of the awards really don't like genre television unless it's really high-concept sci-fi or high-concept fantasy, but I think there are some people in this cast who definitely deserve at least a nomination. The overall plot is generally pretty good. They move from set piece to set piece pretty quickly. You can tell they were really trying to stretch out as much as they could for the 8 episodes, in the sense of fitting everything they wanted to do into those 8 episodes of the series. And I think overall they did a good job. It did feel a little bit bloated at times. There is a lot of stuff happening all at once, and some of the threads are either cut off in weird ways or just don't tie up as well as they could. In general, though, the villains are not the focus of the story. It's really about the character dynamics within the group, which they really did a good job of earning the fact that these people start becoming friends and comrades and really forming a bond in a relatively short amount of time. They did a really good job with that. It is genuinely fun to watch that. The villains in it are more a means to an end for the most part, at least until the end, which makes some of the revelations that happen throughout the series not feel totally earned. In particular, one of the two villains feels completely underserved and felt like they were taking up a lot of time for their storyline to just kind of peter out. But overall, did enjoy those characters and what they brought to the table. They do a good job of making the threats themselves feel real and feel pertinent and feel like they're coming up. The first time Peacemaker encounters one of the villains is a wonderfully manic, over-the-top fight scene that ends on a truly shocking note that was just so much fun. Which brings me to the action on the show is genuinely well done. They pick a lot of the right moments for action set pieces. A lot of the fights have real tenseness to them, knowing where these characters come from. There is always a worry in the back of their mind. Are they going to kill off anybody? They do manage to bring real tension to whether or not these characters are going to make it out of the situations they are in. There are real threats there, usually deftly handled in keeping that tension up and then cutting it and then giving you a moment of catharsis afterwards, and usually a good laugh as well. The action sequences themselves are well directed, they're well choreographed and fun to watch play out. They are fairly violent. If you've seen Suicide Squad, it's not quite to that level of violence, but it gets pretty close at times. Know that going in. All the parental guidance warnings. The mystery that the show sets up is good. They do a good job of threading the needle over the course of a few episodes, really making you wonder what's going on, and then they give you answers at a relatively decent pace, so you never feel like you're missing out on anything. Too many mystery shows try to leave everything until the last moment and then reveal everything at once, and oftentimes can create more of a frustrating watch than anything else. So getting a chance to see a show that really gave you answers as it went along was fun. Granted, it's a very different type of show, so it makes sense that they would do that. I mean, from the very first moments of the show, they do a great job of really setting up the tone. The opener is absolutely wonderful. The first episode does a good job of really showing you who the character is through some interactions that just had me laughing, just gut-busting from moment one. And like I said, the opening dance sequence that they open the show with is also just wonderful. They also do a good job of making sure you know that this does take place in the DC universe. Sometimes it comes across as a bit forced with some of the characters they reference and the context that they reference them, but overall there are a lot of fun references and a couple of really cool cameos that happen throughout the series. And it's nice to see James Gunn once again just scraping the bottom of the barrel for some random, really random characters to bring out for this series. You can tell the dude knows his comic books because he really brings in some deep cuts at various times and talks about characters in some really funny ways. I'm really intrigued to see where they're going to go with future seasons of this. For some dream casting, I'd love to see them throw in Lumberjack, specifically played by Jared Keeso from Letterkenny, as kind of the woke Canadian foil to Peacemaker. I just think they could have a lot of fun with that. While most of the positives really have to do with the fact that the direction overall is really good, the cast is well written, the plot lines are well written. Some of the big problems come down to the show definitely bumps up against its budget on a pretty regular basis. There are definitely moments where you can really see the seams on both the location choices that they have as well as the special effects themselves. They try to keep them, they do a good job of keeping the overall special effects to a minimum so that when they need them, they make as much of an impact as they can. Specifically, one of the big reveals is a pretty wonderful bit of CG. And considering that one of the villains is very heavily CG, they do a good job of animating that as well. And then after the budgetary issues, there are some problems with the writing. Like I said, some of the plot threads get developed and then never totally tie together. And some of the Some of the set pieces definitely work better than others. There are big highs and big lows in this show, but the highs definitely outnumber the lows by a pretty substantial margin. There are some points where the humor goes a little bit further than it needs to, or they stretch out a bit much longer than it needs to be, which is always a risk when you're making these types of a show. It is brutal, it is over the top, so keep that in mind before you watch. It's like I said before, it's definitely not going to be for everyone. Violence, sex, drug use, all of the above. As I mentioned before, the show had a little bit of an issue with being unfocused. There were so many plot lines happening at once that it felt like the main plot line or the more integral plot lines were getting stretched a little bit thin. It almost felt like there was a lot of filler. It wouldn't have been so bad if everything got tied up more at the end, but one major plot line just gets cut off at one point, but it ties back into the series in a good way. And then another one felt like a lot of build up to something that didn't totally deliver on what I could, and I feel like a lot of that was a budgetary thing, but still fun. Still really fun to see where Peacemaker goes himself, seeing all the characters grow and change. I saw an interview with James Gunn where he mentioned talking about the finale and why certain decisions were made, and it's because you do really see the Peacemaker of this show at the end is a different Peacemaker than the one that you saw in the Suicide Squad. He does grow and change as he's dealing with issues of his childhood and issues of the expectations that have been placed on him from years of mental abuse, which I won't get too much into. Maybe get into that in a little bit in the spoilers. But yeah, overall, a lot of things to like and a lot of things to kind of keep it below being like the one of the best shows of the year, but still incredibly fun. Getting into spoiler territory, because there are a few things I do want to mention. Skip ahead to whatever I put over here, I guess, somewhere. Like, skip ahead to there and then we'll get past the spoilers. For everyone still here, some of the reveals were pretty crazy. Going back to what I was saying about the show having good emotional stakes on top of everything else, there were more than one moment in there that were genuinely heartbreaking. Watching every time Peacemaker had to confront his dad was intense. Him having to come to terms with all the things that happened to him. There were also some really, really good dramatic moments, specifically, putting this in the spoiler section. Murn's death later in the show was heartbreaking. Especially, it was like, we got to the moment where Harcourt and Adebayo come in and find Murn dead, and then find the butterfly version of Murn. Spoilers. All I'm sitting here and I'm starting to tear up a little bit, and all I can think of is, screw you, Peacemaker, for making me cry over a bug death. But overall, really well handled as far as that goes. The reveal that Adebayo is actually Amanda Waller's daughter was crazy. I thought they were going to do a little bit more with that by making it such a big reveal, and having it be an integral part of the series made it feel like that was going to mean a little bit more, but it was just ultimately supposed to tie into themes of parenthood and parental trauma, which, man, thinking about a lot of James Gunn's stories now, I feel like he's got issues with his dad. Yeah, I've got the feeling James Gunn has some parent issues. But that being said, he handles that subject incredibly well. And then how they tied that into Peacemaker's own storyline with what happened to his brother, which you find out over the course of the story that he blames himself for his brother's death, but it turns out it's really his dad's fault. His dad, who happens to be a white supremacist superhero, which was a ridiculous reveal that was absolutely wonderful. Robert Patrick, who plays his dad, was almost gleefully playing this absolute scumbag throughout the whole thing, who turns into, as I mentioned, who turns out to be not just a white supremacist leader, but a white supremacist superhero. Just incredibly wonderfully well done. The only problem is they built up his character and kept going back to him throughout the series, that when it actually came time for him to do something, it felt like they cut that storyline a little bit short. It didn't totally deliver on the setup. It might have been a time constraint thing, it might have been a budgetary constraint thing, but it just felt underserved. Which is, as I said, one of my big problems is that a few of those plot lines didn't come together. Like I said, Adebayo being Amanda Waller's daughter never fully felt fleshed out. The Peacemaker's dad storyline never fully felt like it came together. the butterfly storyline, while really well done, didn't feel like they set up the swerve for the end on that one as well as they could have, although they did handle the reveal very well, and most of what they did with the butterflies was handled incredibly well. It just felt like the story, with everything going on, it felt unfocused, and it felt like they couldn't quite flesh out everything, and so they just kind of didn't. And some of that is trying to choose where to put your resources. But for a James Gunn project, who's usually really good at focusing his storylines all in one direction, felt like a little bit sloppy. But overall, still better than most. The other big problem I have with this series is, in the finale, they kind of blow up a big chunk of the DCU with Adebayo revealing Task Force X to the world. It's like, I'm excited to see where season 2 will go after that, but I'm not as sure about what that's all going to mean for the greater DCU. I feel like Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and all of these series that they're developing are kind of going to sit in their own bubble outside of the greater DCU, but it still felt a little bit weird to do that, and yeah, we'll just have to kind of see where that goes. And then the other big one was Judo Master felt really underserved. They introduced his character, and he was fun for that little scene he was in, and they kept trying to flesh him out more, and they never did quite enough, and he always felt like he was just kind of there for a lot of the series as like an explainer for that last bit in the finale. Yeah, he was just kind of there. He felt like they didn't need to focus as much on his character, but I feel like they have plans for him in the future, especially with where this season ended. But yeah, I don't know. His character was a little bit problematic. The other big complaint I would have is that the moral messaging of the series has also got a little bit muddled. If I had to take a guess at what they were going for overall, one is getting over the sins of the past and the sins that are passed down, and being your own person, breaking the cycle. That's definitely there. But then there were also issues with where they were trying to say moral things about violence itself and killing people, and ultimately it felt like they got to, well, killing people is fine sometimes and killing people other times is not okay, and it never felt like they really got to where they wanted to go with the moral messages of the series. It also felt weird when a couple of these characters in Suicide Squad were going out of their way to defy Waller in helping some of these bad people do bad things in Suicide Squad, or were going out of their way to prevent violence. Harcourt in specific didn't feel like the same character she was in Suicide Squad, but it still worked for the series they were writing. It just felt like they pushed her into a different direction than what she was in that series. That being said, overall, I really, really enjoyed this show. It does have flaws. The storytelling wasn't necessarily as good as it could have been. There were some times where it focused on shocking stuff, and they were juggling a whole bunch of balls that eventually a couple of them just kind of dropped off. The violence and humor can be a little bit over the top, but overall was pretty good, and some of the moral implications of the series didn't totally work either, but other than that, the characters are great, the character interactions are great, the new characters they introduced are a lot of fun, everybody is likable in their own ways. John Cena carried the show amazingly well. It just was a show that was a lot of fun and still managed to do really great comedy and really great drama at the same time. I could not recommend this series more. Just know going in that it's not going to be for everybody. There are people who are going to walk away going, what the hell was that? If you liked the Suicide Squad, you will definitely like this series. If you didn't like the Suicide Squad, there's still a chance you'd like this series. It's a lot of fun, and it is a big recommendation from me. As one more, oh, that's nice, thing that I just want to throw in here at the end, congratulations to James Gunn and Jennifer Holland, who plays Harcourt. They recently got engaged, and I just think that's neat. That being said, I'm James, and this has been Arguing Semantics.
Like and subscribe.
So I'll cut that out, I guess. Yeah, I'm going over my notes right now.